And welcome to the One Hood Power Hour. I am your co host, Kahari Mosley, here with Miracle Jones. And we're very excited for the next hour. We'll be delving deep into local, state, and national politics, as well as taking a very, very deep dive into the special elections that will happen in the greater Pittsburgh area in the 19th legislative district vacated by Jake Wheatley and in the 24th legislative district vacated by Ed Gainey. And we're very excited in a few minutes after we get into our headlines. We will be bringing on an all-star panel to talk about those elections and other political news. So we're very excited once again be joined by Chris Potter from WESA, Ryan Dito from the Tribune Review, and David Dix from Luminous Strategies based in Harrisburg to talk about those elections. But before we get to that and before we get to our all-star panel, so much to talk about. And I guess the first thing that I'll start off with, Miracle, is one thing that has really, really reverberated throughout the political world is the censuring of Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, the two members of the bipartisan January 6th Commission, but the two Republican members of that committee. And there's been a lot of Republicans that have come out, even, Mike Pence, who's been very quiet, came out over the weekend, with some statements that have been, much stronger than before. I won't necessarily say they were strong statements, but they were much stronger than statements that he's made before. So what do you make of all of the hullabaloo this weekend over the RNC censure and now what looks like Republican infighting?
Um, I I think that there is a really serious conversation about what the next 2 years are going to look like and how people are going to be able to choose whether or not they want to run as candidates or if they want to align not necessarily with a political party in the GOP or the Republicans or more with Trump. And what we're seeing is a lot of people say, you know what, we're going to align instead of with the party with this individual. And there is not necessarily infighting, but you see people basically trying to say it's going to be this us or them type situation because we know that these elections are coming up. More people are registering to vote. A lot of people have been motivated to come out and vote more than ever before because they're seeing that when some people take office, a lot of personal rights and liberties are being restricted. So there is a groundswell of movement happening. And in order to keep people really on the conservative side, people are saying it's either Trump or bust. And for Cheney and other folks to sit there and say, hey, we do not want to become the party of actual physical violence and actual physical rioting and aggression against police and elected officials. We need to take a step back while there is other fraction of the party saying, you know what, January 6th and what's going on in Ottawa and these different places is just legitimate political discourse. People are going to attack, institutions. They're going to take over cities, and that's just how we're going to expand the conservative agenda. It's going to be very telling to see how people are responding because, like I said, Pence came out and said, "Look, I can't change the Constitution." You had Mitt Romney come out and say, Cheney was right when she said that the stuff that happened on January 6th was wrong. You see some people making these statements, but you really don't see that parlaying into a split of votes, right? So even though there is a conversation around January 6th, none of the Republican senators voted for the Voting Rights Act. None of the Republican senators voted for, the Build Back better plan. So even though they're having a conversation around January 6th, the conservatives are all still in line when it comes to voting. And so it's not necessarily infighting per se that's going to lead to any changes in policy. It's just this really debate about how to deal with physical violence within the party.
Yeah, and staying on the RNC, and taking a quick turn locally, Pittsburgh is no longer in the running for the Republican National Convention in 2024. And actually, Ryan Dito, who's be joining us shortly, did a story in the Tribune Review about it as well. But it was a lot of conversation, locally, a lot of condemnation locally as well about the decision of Visit Pittsburgh to move forward, with a bid. But one of the things that did come out is there was a hospitality situation in Salt Lake City, I believe, at the National RNC gathering, and Pittsburgh was the one city that did not send a delegation or do a hospitality room to kind of make even more of a pitch. So I think that kind of sent the signal, as well as it was known that the RNC was reading news articles and kind of testing the waters and seeing, which cities seemed to have the highest level of enthusiasm. And it didn't appear that Pittsburgh, had a unified enthusiasm to host the RNC. So I'm sure they read the tea leaves like everyone else did.
Correct. And for full transparency, I was a part of a group of community organizers that met with the mayor's office as well as Visit Pittsburgh to talk about what this meant and impact for the city, safety wise, community wise, and advertisement wise, because there was a lot of concerns about people coming to the city to cause chaos and disruption. Just because we see, again, I'll keep referencing what's going on in Ottawa, we don't have the capacity to respond to a violent takeover of our city. And if people are going to say that taking over government buildings, assaulting officers, assaulting citizens is going to be a normal form of discourse, what does that mean for the communities and residents, particularly Black and Brown people who live and work in the city, who have to come into the city to work in the restaurants and retail and in these arts and culture jobs? What does it mean for like their safety, for organization to come into the city and with these violent narratives? And so it is really great to see that the RNC right now is not coming to Pittsburgh, but it is very telling that people are paying attention to Pittsburgh, as we know that it is going to be a $1 billion race, and Pennsylvania is a swing state. So we know it's going to be more people coming into the city, more people engaging us. And so it's going to be very important that all of the political groups and affiliations really have an understanding of how people are going to behave in the city, what ideology they're bringing, and if they're going to come, to make sure that they are not coming with a mindset to attack people here. So, yes, a lot of people were relieved to see the RNC wasn't coming to Pittsburgh, but there's still ongoing conversations about people coming here because we know all of the candidates are going to be holding rallies here in Pittsburgh. We know that all of the political groups, whether affiliated or not, are going to be holding rallies here in Pittsburgh. So, what does it mean, and how is our city planning to allow people to engage in First Amendment protests and First Amendment political speech without causing violence and chaos in the city? So, this is an ongoing conversation, but I think as for right now, 2024 will not be the host of the convention here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and moving from national politics to state politics, we see that Val Arkush, uh, county commissioner from the Philadelphia area, I believe a Montgomery County commissioner, has pulled out of the U.S. Senate race. So now it appears to be a three-person race: John Fetterman, Malcolm Kenyatta, and Connor Lamb. As we're now in the true political season, we'll start to see, things really open up, and these fields start to take shape in a way that they didn't in 2021.
Yeah, I know everyone's like super stressed out, but I'm really starting to like following the Pennsylvania elections because you're starting to see how people not only look at Pennsylvania, but what their messaging is, how they're what towns they're visiting, what slogans that they're using. And again, we know as closer we get to the actual election date, more people will stop their campaigns. It should be noted that February 15th, I believe, is the day that people will start requesting ballot signatures. And so you're going to see really who is going to still be here in a couple of weeks because if people don't get those signatures, it doesn't matter what they've done up until now. They won't be able to be on the ballot. So we'll see a lot more people drop off in the coming weeks. But I think that it's great to have competitive primaries. And with that, over the weekend, the Pennsylvania GOP actually said they will not be endorsing people this primary season. They're really going to let the voters decide what their Pennsylvania um, ballot looks like. There's been different conversations. Some people are saying the Pennsylvania Republicans do not want to upset Trump by going against some of the people he's endorsed. Other people have said they're trying to, make sure that they have all the money that they can ready to go for the general. And some have also said it's just right now more financially feasible to allow all of these candidates to run their races and determine the future of the party. And so that is going to be really in juxtaposition to the DNC, who essentially was able to endorse the whole entire slate outside of the Senate race. So again, we're going to see, like for the first time in a long time, really competitive primaries, and we're also going to have a really competitive general election for all of these Commonwealth cases. Positions. So I am finding it fascinating, but that this is not going to be a traditional we'll know in April, we'll know in May who the candidates are. We really are going to have to do work up until the general election in November.
Absolutely, and with that breakdown of the latest in statewide political news, I think it's perfect timing to bring on our all-star panel tonight. We are so excited to have Ryan Dito of the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, David Dix of Luminous Strategies, and Chris Potter from WESA FM. Welcome to the Power Hour.
Be here.
Hey, everyone.
Yeah, good to be with you all.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And as we were, preparing to come on over the last half an hour, before we wanted to jump into the 19th and 24th legislative district, there is other political news that we should cover. So, starting with you, Chris, you talk about a major decision that happened in the Supreme Court.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court this afternoon basically reversed a lower court that had said the state of Alabama would have required the state of Alabama to redraw its own congressional redistricting map to include two majority Black districts. Right now, there's only one out of the, I think it's 7 congressional districts in Alabama. And the lower court had said, look, the case law here is pretty well established. You can, without too much trouble, draw a second district that has a majority Black population. And this is a state where the Black population has been increasing while the white population decreases. And if you don't do it, you have a lack of representation for Black residents of that state. The Supreme Court today, by a 5-4 ruling, all of your hardline conservatives on the one side and John Roberts siding with the more liberal faction, said, you know what, we're just going to put a hold on that. We're going to let the case develop. We'll hear arguments and all that stuff, but we are not going to weigh in on these lines prior to the 2022 election. So those lines as drawn, which is essentially a one Democrat friendly district in that state, they will be in effect through 2022 at least, and then who knows how long afterwards, based on how quickly the courts move. The majority said, we're not saying that this map is a good map. We're not saying that it doesn't have problems, but we're saying let's let the process play out. It's sort of the voting equivalent to what they've been doing with choice issues in Texas. We're gonna let this sort of this very draconian law about abortion stand in Texas while the case works the way through the system. And meanwhile, of course, you've got women in difficult circumstances in Texas, like right now. So it's a sort of procedural thing that sort of leaves a status quo in place for at least this election cycle. And, I wouldn't venture even to guess how much longer after that.
Yeah. And it really has, obviously it has immediate implications in Alabama, but now a lot of legal scholars are thinking that the same thing might happen in Louisiana and some of these other southern states that have, very large Black populations. And we're also looking to have that same, ruling where you basically kind of get rid of racial gerrymandering so that you can have 2 or more Black majority districts in these states. And it's pretty bleak in terms of that standpoint and how that will move forward through those southern states.
The irony here too is that Roberts, who some of the older heads out there may recall, Roberts joined with a majority in the Shelby versus Holder decision about 6 or 7 years ago, which basically kind of opened the door for this ruling by basically saying parts of the Voting Rights Act were unconstitutional. And a big part of Roberts's argument in particular was, hey, it's not the old South anymore. Things have changed in the South. And folks will remember too that this is the decision where Ruth Bader Ginsburg says, that's like saying that, I'm standing under the umbrella and I'm dry, therefore I don't need umbrellas, right, when it's raining out. And I mean, I think historically you could kind of see that, maybe not as much has changed as Judge Roberts would have had us and himself believe several years ago, in that he is now siding with a more liberal majority here in an effort, or minority, I should say, to try and protect this map and this lower court decision, which by all accounts was, well within the law as had been written and as it existed until 2:00 this afternoon. So it is remarkable, and I think for a lot of folks disturbing to see how quickly once that door got opened, states have been willing, especially as Ryan says in the South, to run through it.
I think if there's any bright spot when you look at the landscape in regard to these rulings, it's that African Americans are winning in districts that are not majority minority. And as we're looking at the expansion of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, many of those members are coming from districts that are no longer majority minority. You can look at far left progressives like Representative Cori Bush, who does not represent a majority Black district, or you could look at Congressional Black Caucus Chair Joyce Beatty, who has a district that might be 30% African American and 70% white. So African American leaders are finding ways to kind of break into these districts that don't have to necessarily be packed for a majority minority district, but because of their ideas, their principles, and what they espouse, are able to win districts that, quote unquote, in a time past would have been considered unwinnable. That's encouraging, and so certainly should be looked at as a bright spot.
Yeah, and there's a big chance that happens in Pittsburgh this cycle too, because you have 2 Black candidates who are running for Congress here that especially look pretty strong. So I think I would say that's a very strong possibility happening.
And out east, when you look at Philadelphia, I mean, there may be a challenge for the newly drawn Brendan Boyle district by a very leading state senator who has a lot of political heft, and that could be a district, again, represented by a white congressman that could be very shortly represented by an African American. That's the progress. That's the bright spot in all this, and that's what we should kind of focus on. There are winnable districts out there.
So talking about winnable districts, David, I'm going to come to you. Can we give us just a little bit of an update and around rundown, if you will, about what's going on with the maps here in Pennsylvania? You talked about some of the new competitive districts, that there has been ongoing conversations about what the maps are going to look like. The Supreme Court is hearing some, arguments later on this week. Can you just talk about the state of our maps right now in the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I think for the first time in a very long, long time, or at least in my memory, you had a redistricting commission that was at least kind of working under one cohesive leadership in the form of Chairman Mark Nornberg. I think that while the Republicans who serve in leadership and were represented on that commission, and the Democrats who serve on that commission and were represented on that commission may have different points of view and obviously different agenda when it comes to what they want the district maps to look like, they were able to find a great bit of consensus, much to the ire of many of their members, both in the Republican and Democratic side. I think for the first time, again, you have a level of cooperation that's going to make it really difficult to kind of turn away these maps and see them as unreasonable. Essentially, on the congressional map, certainly sign off from everybody. On the state house and Senate maps, a little bit of jockeying depending on what part of the legislator that leader represented and how it kind of affected their ability to either retain the majorities or break into the majority. But ultimately, again, under the leadership of Mark Nornberg, you have maps that are going to be seen as kind of consensus and well thought out. They're obviously going to be pushed off to the state Supreme Court, and they'll have their opportunity to review them. But that court, if you look at their precedents that they've set in the past, won't probably kick those out either, right? So I think ultimately you probably may have a May 17th primary with maps being kind of approved and ready for that election day. And the doom and gloom that we had initially hoped, at least I initially kind of thought may happen in terms of pushing the election back into June or even later, I think we may have avoided that as a state. And again, that's a good thing.
I'm a little less sanguine, especially about that state house map being resolved. The majority leader there, Carrie Benninghoff, was pretty has been throughout the process, and even up until the vote on Friday, pretty caustic about the map. If you there's a pretty clear thread of, as David says, a state court challenge. Some of his remarks, too, suggested that they might go with a federal challenge as well, right, alleging sort of due process stuff and things like that. So, where that goes, I don't know. I mean, I think it's definitely true that the state Supreme Court is unlikely to weigh in, and we'll see. I mean, it's a different question when you're kind of talking about a state legislature. Sometimes the federal courts are a little less anxious to weigh in on some of those races. But if you if you raise that issue in a federal court, they're going to hear it out. So, I definitely think, the state Senate side, absolutely a fairly consensus driven thing there. And Kim Ward, the Senate Republican, voted in favor of both maps, although she made it clear that if she could have voted on the House one separately, she would have voted no on it. Wouldn't have made a difference, but so we'll see how that goes forward. And at the end of the day, David's quite right. I think it's just we end up with the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court, really kind of calling the shots on all of these things, and seeing where it lands.
Yeah, that seems like
my expectation, given the state Supreme Court, is that they would then approve the maps, right? They won't see anything untoward in the maps. And again, to the timeline point, there was a huge fear and a lot of speculation around whether or not this primary can be pushed back. Yeah. And as much money as folks are spending to get elected to these offices, how they protract those budgets and make those longer primaries work was something that was of concern to a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Although the TV news guys were excited.
Ryan, did you have another point you wanted to add?
No, just that. Yeah, we don't know what if they get a federal challenge, that's really the biggest thing. I think, I agree with David that if it's to the state, courts and, just for the state Supreme Court, it's just we're probably going to just see that actually hitting that, deadline that we all kind of want to see with with a May primary. But if the feds get involved and they delay it or anything like that, and we can't really predict what's going to happen, especially what happened within Alabama, then they might do something else. It's really unpredictable. But last time there was a state level kind of issue that the federal courts took up with Senator Brewster's race. That federal judge basically said, nope, it's a state issue. The state Supreme Court has already ruled in. They have precedent. I'm not going to touch that. So if it's that same judge, which was like the same judge here in Western Pennsylvania, then hopefully he'll same the same precedent. But if not, then yeah, we don't know.
Yeah, and staying on just the issue of maps, before we jump into the 19th and 24th legislative districts, Commonwealth Court Judge McCullough did rule in favor of the congressional maps, whereas we have a very strange process that we talked about a few episodes ago, where a legislative redistricting commission chooses the legislative maps, and then the actual legislature chooses the congressional map. So now we're at this part, we're at that other kind of a two-step process. And at least for now, the Commonwealth Court, the special master, as was appointed by the Supreme Court, has chosen to go with the Republican version of the maps. I guess we could start with Dave, and then go Chris, then Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, the process is certainly cumbersome, if you will, and that initial selection of the Republican version of the maps kind of makes it even, again, a more protracted process. But this is something that ultimately, it's going to have to find consensus sooner or later. I don't think we'll have another example where we are going multiple cycles with maps still in limbo. But how it's going to actually come fully together is a little bit above my pay grade, if you will.
Yeah, I just in a way, it's not too surprising. This is a Commonwealth Court judge, Patricia McCullough, who's kind of has made some rulings that have raised eyebrows in the past. She was one of the very few judges anywhere in the country to uphold, at least in a preliminary sort of way, Donald Trump's challenges to Pennsylvania election law in this case, of course. Her argument seems to be, and I haven't gone through it. It's lengthy. Her argument seems to be that because the legislature, which is Republican controlled, passed this map, it's the closest thing we have to the sort of voice of the people. And I mean, it's a really dubious proposition, just as a matter of common sense. Yes, Republicans do control both houses of the legislature, but the Democrat who was elected is a governor, is the Democrat. So, it's hard to sort of say, like, we created these branches, and we all remember like ninth grade civics class to be sort of, equal and, sort of co-equal branches of government. So how you sort of get to a place of putting one above the other when only one of these folks is actually elected by the entire state. Democrats are obviously going to argue that, and there's really nothing that says, that the Supreme Court has to give any credence to that opinion. So we will see, but it is certainly for the Republicans who push that map. This is going to be a talking point for them. It was a map sort of a sort of amended version of one promoted by Amanda Holt, who, is sort of a name people know from previous challenges of earlier gerrymanders. And so, there's some credibility there that attaches to it. But, fundamentally, Republicans didn't like the map that we have now, a map that reversed a long-standing Republican edge and ended up with a congressional delegation whose partisan, skew is about equal, which is kind of where you would sort of expect from a purple state. So we'll see. I mean, there's nothing that says they have to. There's nothing that says they have to, take that opinion and do anything with it. But it's certainly a talking point for the GOP.
Yeah, I think I tweeted today like a little photo of like a cartoon drawing. I was talking with Chris about this too the other day, where we basically are just going all the way. Like, it started with the Supreme Court when they did that ruling, basically to kind of end partisan gerrymandering. And now that we started to draw the map again, we go through all the process that's like this long, arduous, like going through, getting all these maps, so many maps. There's been so many maps, guys. I mean, I love maps, but like, it's too many maps, and we get all through at it. And it's coming right back to the Supreme Court. And it just feels like that, like Commonwealth Court decision was just part of that process. Like, well, we're going to let Commonwealth Court do this thing. But I think I would guess ultimately that's all going to come back to the Supreme Court, and they're going to draw the maps.
And before we go to Miracle, I do want to just take a second to thank our ASL interpreters, Cameron and Kat, who are holding it down tonight. Thank you so much for your great work. And back to you, Miracle.
Okay, so now that we have the process of the maps, We know we have a couple special elections going on in Pennsylvania. So we get to have a precursor to the election than the actual primary. So a reminder for those on the 19th and 24th, you vote in April and you vote in May. So a little month in between. What I'm gonna start with you, Chris, then come to you, Ryan, then you, David. What do we have to look forward to in the special election? What is the processes by which these special elections are run? Because a little bit different rules.
Right. So first of all, both of these elections, in the 19th and the 24th, and these are to replace Ed Gainey and Jake Wheatley, the mayor of Pittsburgh and his chief of staff. They're both being held April 5th. And although we've been talking about redistricting a lot here, both of these special elections will be according to the current lines because they're filling out the terms for these guys. So if you were in the 19th district, if you voted for Ed Gainey in 2020, you'll be voting in that race. Or if you voted for Jake Wheatley or anybody else in that race, you are eligible to vote in these elections. Essentially what happens is, unlike a regular kind of full bore election, and especially it's important that the Democratic Party, there's no primary in this thing. You kind of get one election, you go with it. And so the parties, to the extent that they want to field a candidate to sort of have the party, label and letter by their name, the committee people choose them. And the Democrats this weekend chose Martell Covington to be their nominee to replace Ed Gainey in District 24. Nice event. Ryan and I were both there. It was great to have some company for a change from the press. Usually I'm all by myself. But at any rate, so he won handily. Second, I think he had about 40 votes. Ryan will correct me if I'm
40, right.
And the next place finisher was Latasha Mays, a longtime activist and advocate in the community. I think she had about 24, 26, something like that. So
yeah,
he was the front runner going in. I think a lot of people expected him to win, and he did. There will be a similar process for the Jake Wheatley seat. That's District 19. This afternoon was actually the deadline for candidates who wanted to be the nominees in that race on the Democratic side. Only 2 filed. There were 6 who went for the Gainey seat. Only 2 did. And they are the people who we've always kind of known were going to be running. Arian Abney, who's challenged Mr. Wheatley for that seat before, and Glenn Grayson, a prominent faith leader in the Hill District. So they'll be vying for the Democratic nomination, I think Thursday evening, right? That's the 10th, I think. So they'll be vying for that, and then we'll kind of see how that process goes. And then anybody else who wants to jump in the race, that you can go and petition and do things like that to be added to the ballot. But right now, I don't know that there's another candidate who's declared for the special election in either of those races. So the special election may not be quite as juicy as the full-blown primary that will be with the new with the new district lines, and that'll be a lot of fun for all involved.
Yeah. It's kind of weird because of these special elections that happen and how you fill these seats, that it really is these Democratic nominating conventions that are like kind of de facto the elections, because you're not likely to see, another candidate. And even if you are, they're going to be an independent or Republican. The Republicans aren't nominating anyone for the 24th seat. I don't think they're going to nominate anyone for the 19th seat. And so it's basically just going to be, Martell is going to be on the ballot for the 24th, and then whoever wins this Dem nominating session for the 19th. And those 2 candidates are very, very extremely likely to just fill out the rest of that seat. But, if you want a real election, you just got to wait another month, and you get your real primary. And basically every candidate for the District 24, I think 5 out of the 6, because of the lines, one of them isn't in the new one, but 5 out of the 6 that ran the Dem nominating convention say that they want to run in the, primary. So voters of that district, instead of just the, nominating committee, will have a say, but it won't be until that, primary.
Yeah, I think where it comes into play most actively, the new district lines in the May primary is in the case of the 19th, where significant portions of the Hill would be kind of re-gerrymandered to another district. And that's obviously a base of support for Reverend Grayson. So depending on whom, as I think Ryan just alluded to, depending on whom wins that nominating committee endorsement next week, it's going to have a lot to do with who wins the the special election. But when you come to the actual primary election in May, it's going to be a lot more complicated depending on what those official lines are and whose kind of base of support is fully included in that.
And that's an interesting point. In the preliminary map, it did not appear that Glenn Grayson was in.
That's right. He
the
wasn't.
legislative district. But then when the map came out on Friday, I looked, and that was the first thing I actually looked for, was to see how far into the Hill the new 19th went. And sure enough, it went into Crawford Square just deep enough that Reverend Grayson was able to get in. And I don't know if some of y'all saw I don't know if it was a Facebook post or Instagram post that Jake Wheatley had posted with a meme from Menace to Society for the Bill Duke, like, you effed up. I don't know who on the
Can't
legislature
put any intent behind that post.
I don't know who.
But I think
no correlation.
I think it's important to point out that came out after the new maps that included Reverend Grayson, that included portions of the Hill. So, if there's anything to be taken from that, it's that even the entree to include portions of the Hill, in his estimation, may not have gone far enough in keeping that district intact and keeping the Hill as a major center of the 19th district. So I think it might be comical, but there's something really to kind of peel back and understand there, in the sense that this is after the fact that they already included portions of the Hill where it was already discounted out. So now that they've included portions of the Hill, you have folks on the Hill saying they haven't gone far enough. So I think there's still more work to do from those advocates' perspective.
There's some concern too from people in the 24th as well, which is, we are sort of used to, Homewood being kind of the center of our center of gravity. Out here, sort of more in the eastern part of the city and some of those surrounding areas. And now it's sort of like, now we've kind of got a lot of this other power base as well. And we're going to have to kind of figure out how all of that looks. So yeah, I mean, even from the 24th, it's not like they necessarily feel they came out ahead in all of this, right? Like it's definitely a front thing. I will say I talked to Reverend Grayson earlier, and I just said, because I wanted to make sure, like, I was like, you're in the new district, right? And he said something, like, yes, by the grace of Jesus or something like that. He was kind of kidding. And I was like, save some room for, Jake Wheatley or whoever in your prayers too. Cause that could have gone a different way for you. But yeah, it's fascinating how that has played out and what that means. And of course, we've talked about this on the show before. The tricky thing is that the way, the demographic trend here, that Pittsburgh's Black population has been shrinking. It's been moving outside the city. And even within the city, it's sort of been dispersing itself in sort of a different way. And you can just, like that 19th district, if you just like took a time lapse thing over the course of the past few decades, it would just look like some sort of crazy, I don't even know what, pinata sort of going up or something. And it is a challenge. And it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out this spring.
Well, it's important to recognize that since we're taking the timeline, that those neighborhoods were created by redlining and government practices, and they were decentralized by a lack of investment and a lack of access to quality, low, affordable homes, right? So it's like, people are going out into the suburbs to find homes that they can afford, and that's had a demonstrative effect on the Black population of Pittsburgh. But we should feel it as a demonstrative effect on all of Pittsburgh, right? I think that's important. I was on another program a few weeks ago where Chairman Mark Norberg was on, and he was alluding to him just talking to or setting up a call with Chief of Staff Wheatley, like just after that. So I prodded him a bit to say, I know that conversation can be pretty intense given, the initial map that they had presented out there without the Hill District included. And I know for a fact that given that last exchange, that there's been any number of conversations between stakeholders here in Pittsburgh and that leadership of the district. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for that. And let's jump back into Sunday. We talked a little bit about kind of just the nuts and bolts of how we got to this process. And I know there was one candidate that participated in a forum, and there's a story in the city paper. So at least it appears that there's maybe up to seven candidates: William Anderson, Lamar Blackwell, Delia Chatterfield, Martell Covington, Randall Taylor, Latasha Mays, who we mentioned before, and Natisha Washington would be the 7 candidates that at least have announced some intentions. Now, we're still a long way to April 5th, and that could change. But just for the fairness doctrine, to make sure we give everybody equal time. But Ryan and Chris, talk a little bit about besides the final results. What were your impression? Because Chris, we talk. I was there. I voted. I am gonna respect the sanctity of the secret ballot. I'm not gonna reveal who I voted for as a Democratic committee man. But full disclosure, I am a Democratic committee man in the Old 24th. I will be joining, if I am elected this spring, the 34th district. That's represented by Summer Lee currently, due to some of the redistricting that we talked about. But Chris, one thing that we talked about before they really started to count the votes, was that by and large, this is one of the deepest, most impressive, fields of candidates that we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, several people said that to me, just that they were really impressed. These are several. There were some familiar names, right? I mean, Randall Taylor, school board member, has run for a couple of posts in the past, is well known to folks. But there were a few people, and you mentioned a couple of them: Lamar Blackwell, Natisha Washington, Martell Covington himself, first-time candidates, really. And yet, I spoke to not all of them before Saturday, but several of them. And I mean, these aren't folks who just like woke up one morning and said, "I'm going to drop $1,000 on a filing fee and decide to run to see if I can get the Democratic nod." They have been invested in their neighborhoods and their communities for a long time. So, even when I was talking to some of Mr. Covington's team, they just kind of said, we'll be seeing these people again, like in other races. It's very likely, as Ryan mentioned, Ms. Washington will not be able to run for the full 2-year term because she's a Wilkinsburg resident, and the new district won't include Wilkinsburg. But here's somebody who's made it very clear that should Summer Lee win her congressional seat and that seat becomes vacant, the 34th, that she'd be in the running again. And maybe Ashley Comins, who had been a candidate at one point for this race and withdrew because of those map concerns, she may also be back in. So it's been, I just have to say, like, and not just in this particular race, but in a bunch of them, I could not imagine 10, 15 years ago the sort of depth of talent, the number of candidates coming out, just because Pittsburgh and the Southwestern Pennsylvania has been so terrible, at sort of encouraging this stuff. And it's whether it's, I think it's partly the Summer Lee phenomena, partly, just a lot of folks are looking and seeing, like, you can run and make it. David made this point earlier, like, even in districts that you don't think of as, the black district or whatever, you can run and win in this environment, and people are taking that. And it was fascinating to watch and to see folks who, again, I did not know 5 years ago, probably because they were still in high school. I feel old is what I'm trying to say, because I'm not used to this in my life where, like, I'm older than the candidates. It was never supposed to get to this point, but it is
much older.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. Thanks.
I think the candidates were extremely impressive. I mean, they didn't seem like first time candidates, and I spoke with most of them, and they were polished, they were ready, they were ambitious. They all had different kind of ties to the community that they really wanted to play up, and so they were experienced too. It wasn't just like, oh, well, I can do this, and like, oh, I got $1,000, like Chris said, and like, who knows, right? No, like, they were serious. And so, I definitely expect to see them moving forward. And then with different lines that are coming out too, that they could be in different districts. And so it was, they all had campaign literature and everything like that. I mean, it was legitimate. So it was impressive.
Blackwell had T-shirts, man.
Right.
Like just a bunch of T-shirts, and his dad was there.
His dad was talking him up too, and
he was.
Like in a really authentic way, and he's ready to go, and he seemed like he was too. And he probably doesn't have the committee connections that you have, but again, when we talk about voting, voters versus committee members, then we could totally see a totally different game play out. In the primary.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what one of the questions we raised at the top of the hour. We're now moving into a situation where we have competitive elections from school board all the way up into Senate. So the traditional goings on of politics have totally changed, while also seeing this need to have more outsiders in politics. So, one, are you seeing some of these trends too? How is that impacting the way you're able to have access to candidates and create the stories that you write professionally? And three, what does that mean for like the future of politics and your professional estimations?
For me, I mean, it's great. It's great to have these candidates that are really ready to go. They want to talk to you. I remember writing some stuff early on in my time at City Paper. You'd have like county council races, and like it was just some guy, or actually Chris and I were talking about, Joey Vadvarka, kind of long time Senate candidate. And he's a really interesting guy, but he doesn't really seem to have that like really, really, really like political ambition that some of these other people have. And it makes it way more interesting. They're ready to talk. They're ready to spread their stories. They're ready to get out to the voters and really give a difference of like who they want to be. And I think it makes for better political reporting.
I'll yield to David here if he wants to jump in there.
I was going to say that I think the insiders are much different than they once were 10 or 15 or even 20 years ago, right? So it's like the insiders look different. They come in different packages. And I think that's why you're seeing these candidates come to the table kind of ready and equipped to kind of run in a way that we hadn't seen in the past. Before, if you're a younger candidate, there was really no guidance or navigation that you could get to a seat at the table. But now there are any number of avenues like One Hood that will bolster you up, give you a direction, kind of give you some insider, quote unquote, advantage. I mean, who would have thought that One Hood would be convened by the mayor to take on serious issues 5 years ago, right? Probably not. But now here you are in a position to kind of add that and then be an insider, an influencer in a way that the organization in its infancy wasn't established to be. So I think we have to look at this always as a positive. These trends are certainly positive. The election of Mayor Gainey is another footnote in that trend. The election of Summer Lee is certainly a strong footnote in that trend. And all of that kind of builds momentum for younger candidates and, quite frankly, candidates from less traditional backgrounds feeling empowered to have a seat at the table, have a voice, and, run and win.
Yeah, David makes a great point there, which is it's not just the candidates. There's an infrastructure that exists now that didn't before. And it does have something to do with the professionals who do it. I mean, and it has to do with sort of, again, Summer Lee and the Unite PAC and some of the efforts that were, I think we saw this in a big way last year with the Common Pleas judicial races. We've talked about that before on the program where, you had, in the old days, it was just sort of like if you got the Democratic Committee endorsement, you got your name on a slate card, and nobody knows what the hell they're doing when they vote for judges anyway. So, whatever. I'll do these guys. Thanks. That other people are out there. There are other channels now to sort of get that information, and they're channels that are more ideologically coherent now. You know what you're getting. Before you could vote for a judge on the Democratic committee slate, and you didn't necessarily know what kind of judge you were getting. You get a judge now who's been backed by Unite PAC or something like that. And it's much clearer to you what kind of judicial philosophy you're supporting and on down the way, up and down the ballot. And that definitely didn't exist a few years ago. At least it hadn't surfaced to this level. And David makes a great point. You can't separate those two things. They're both part of this sort of real moment of change here, at least in Allegheny County.
And actually, I know we're the guest on the show, but I'd love to hear Kahari's perspective on this as being someone who founded and started the League of Young Voters back in the day, which is the first of its kind of organization to get young people engaged in the area, and now is still contributing in a mighty way with One Hood.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that, it definitely, it comes full circle. I think me and Chris, we kind of always talk about that when we run into each other, at these events, and, I was saying to Morgan Overton, who's a young, rising star in local Democratic politics, is like, I remember, when I was in her shoes, you know what I mean? I remember, being, in my mid 20s, at these events and they looked a lot different. That's the other thing, and I think that's I think it's just a natural, kind of thing that happened, in Pittsburgh where, you know, you know, um, basically like from younger baby boomers to basically older millennials kind of left Pittsburgh. So people who right now between the ages of late 30s, to early 60s, like left. So that kind of left like the older generation of baby boomers in power for 10 or 15 years longer than most other cities around the country, and then now it's like all of a sudden we see this whole revolution, but it was really just that backlog that was just waiting to be unplugged, as the baby boomers began to more and more age out of public office. They were just overrepresented for an inordinate amount of years. And then that actually fell out. And then all of a sudden you see, Sarah Innamorato, Summer Lee, you see electorate emerge that could elect Ed Gainey to mayor of Pittsburgh, which was, would be considered, inconceivable 10 years ago when he ran and won for the state house against Joe Preston. You know what I mean? Like no one would have, thought that in 10 years, he would go from beating Joe Preston in a race to beating Bill Peduto. That would have been inconceivable, but it's all, part of, a process that's, even goes back before, the stuff that we were doing, with Matt Preston, and Bill Peduto and Pat Clark, all those folks, in the early 2000s, it goes back to even the stuff in the late 80s that Furlow and those guys were doing. So it's kind of been like this cycle, and it's kind of, over the last 40, 50 years from, even, as Chris knows before, you were writing, but, when they went to the by district city council thing, and that was part of, that decision to make city council look different than it looked, and you wouldn't have, the Italian seat and the Polish seat and the black seat and the very old school kind of early 20th century ethnic style politics that played. But that it took 40, 50 years for the evolution to come. And now we're here, really seeing the results. And, and I remember, even, Bill Peduto used to tell me that I was always a little too over enthusiastic and I wanted the change to come too fast. But now I can say that, as a middle-aged man.
Fancy coming from him.
I can say that it was wise words. It was wise words. It does, things change not as fast as you expect, but we are definitely looking at a whole new political landscape.
What's nice about your timeline is it completely left out Gen Xers. I just want to
hey man, they're the ones that left. They left. They're gone. Chris is the only one.
The two of us are the only ones left.
Chris, I mean, you are like always just the only people at the party. You know what I mean? We're the last of the Mohicans, man. But I always thought there would be a kind of like this transfer, a baby boomer to millennial transfer of power, not like a baby boomer to Gen Xer. You know what I mean? As with so many things, we got passed over, once again, so.
But it's really true. I mean, State Representative Austin Davis was talking to me about this, that it's true of the legislative delegation in Harrisburg too. It's like there are a lot of the older folks, and then there are a lot of people like his age, early 30s, late 20s. And there really is a sort of donut hole there demographically. And I think that might be a challenge for the region going forward, because at some point there is something to be said for having some seniority in a sort of hidebound place like Harrisburg, because it gets you onto committees, and to have some institutional knowledge or whatever. It's a thing like Western Pennsylvania is going to have to negotiate, because we're going to have a lot of different leaders here. Mike Doyle also leaving. So, we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, I think you're completely right. It's that demographic hole, I think, of just people leaving in that for that 20-year period or whatever. I think it's just, it has downstream effects that have been part of my entire life. So I don't expect that to change either.
I guess on a bright note, that's progress, right? We're in a good space.
Yes.
Long is the road, is the toll, but here we are.
It is true, because I mean, Chris, you been covering this stuff, for as long as I've been, on the other side, of the situation, and me and you both remember like being in some rooms at very similar meetings like that for like city council races, when, in 2004, 2005, it would be the public works guy and and so-and-so's secretary and so-and-so's political office and just nice people, but like people that literally you didn't know if there was like somebody standing behind them with a firearm, making them, run, you know what I mean? But not like this group of people that we saw this weekend who were enthusiastic, ambitious, ready to go. But like even like people that got elected 15, 20 years ago in Pittsburgh, we just be like, okay, let's, there was a trend where it was just like your favorite public works person. I mean, that was like the best thing to get elected to a public office in Pittsburgh, like between 2000 and 2008.
Yeah,
like
that's why we had so many public works. That's why we had so many public works people, because it was so hard to choose just one that was your favorite.
That was the thing, and there would be people with PhDs and law degrees and stuff just getting spanked at the polls by like some public works guy, and I don't say that to cast a
and on cold and snowy days like this, we all love our public works guys. So let this not be a PSA. Let this be a PSA.
David wants his street plowed. That's what.
Maybe that's why the plowing. Maybe that's why the plowing is getting worse. Is the plowing getting worse? Is it that because we don't got those public works people in the office anymore? I just.
I see our next investigative report from the Tribune Review shaping up right now. Try to scoop
more public works.
Listen, I mean, maybe that is why their funding hasn't been where it's supposed to be, because they're not there to advocate. So yes, I will look forward to seeing that piece, and for like this piece started on the Power Hour. But as we wrap up, we think about for this upcoming election season, what you're looking forward to seeing. We know we have these special elections, the primary elections. We know there's going to be a lot of outside influence coming within the Commonwealth. So what are some of the things that like you're positively like looking forward to seeing about this election season?
I think Pennsylvania will be the ground zero for the discourse in democracy. I think you have very, very exciting races happening right now, and I think you have parties, as you enumerated at the beginning of the show, choosing different courses for how their candidates are going to be vetted. Right, the Republicans this past weekend said open primary, no endorsement. We want to hear from Mehmet Oz. We want to hear from Dave McCormick. We want to hear from Carlos Sands. We want to hear from everybody and kind of come to a determination. One of the things that I think did come out pretty loud and clear over the weekend is that there's a lot of energy tacking behind former Delaware County Commissioner Dave White, and that's somebody that would give the Democrats fits. A Southeast former elected who can self-finance, who has a mechanical engineering company, which means he's hiring multiple hundreds, if not thousands, of union members, who can, talk the talk and walk the talk, and hasn't really been super aligned with Trump because his vantage point has been more focused locally. And if the Republicans are smart enough to nominate a candidate like that, that's someone who would again give the Democrats fits. On the Democratic side, you have them doing one of two things, right? They're either going to endorse a full slated ticket, in which they did in the case of Attorney General Josh Shapiro and his now running mate, Representative Austin Davis. But on the Senate side, they're saying you guys are going to duke it out and fight it out amongst yourselves. That resulted in an early kind of dismissal from the race from Montgomery County Commissioner Valerie Arkush, but leaving three very, very different candidates left in the race in the form of Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who has most of the cash, but seems to be just losing momentum by the minute. And then you have Representative Connor Lamb, who seems to be the institutional choice, both nationally and statewide. That's what got him up to the kind of the 2/3 threshold for a potential endorsement, but hasn't really been, the most connected candidate, if you will. So there's been multiple introductions into the Philadelphia base, and he's had a difficult time kind of locking in there with grassroots folks. Yes, he's got the Philadelphia Building Trades endorsement. Yes, he's got the mayor of Philadelphia's endorsement, Jim Kenney. But I think there's going to be a lot more work to do to be able to turn that soil in the backyard of Representative Malcolm Kenyatta, who has punched way outside of his weight class. He's getting across the state. He's getting national endorsements, and he's someone who's certainly going to be there throughout the length of the primary. We'll see what Valerie Arkush's removal from the primary landscape means for Malcolm Kenyatta, because I think it stands to mean the most for him.
Yeah, it's the whole, I think in a midterm election, sometimes it doesn't feel this way. Like when there's a presidential election, you always feel like, well, this is when the parties kind of choose who they are and it defines them as an identity. This feels more like that, especially with that Senate race on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, it's really, on both tickets. But because it was such a foregone conclusion that Josh Shapiro was going to be the gubernatorial guy for Democrats. But that Senate thing, there are like real differences, both in terms of, philosophy, but then also that style or whatever. I mean, Fetterman has sort of perfected this sort of social media, sort of viral kind of thing that sort of works for him. He's obviously had years of very favorable national press that he's kind of built on or whatever. Raises money like you wouldn't believe. Kenyatta has been, as I agree with you, running a good campaign in a lot of ways. The one area where he's weak, is one kind of Achilles heel, is with the fundraising. Yeah. And you've got, Connor Lamb in between there, who's proven that unlike Fetterman, he can actually get endorsements from people in his party and some of the traditional base. But unlike Kenyatta, he can actually, does a decent job of raising money as well. So it's just going to be kind of fascinating to see where Democrats go, because I really do think that that's going to be just such an interesting test about where this party goes. We've been talking so much about Allegheny County and the trends there, and those are clear to me, those because they're so obvious, even I can't miss them. But when you look kind of on a statewide level, where is this party headed? It's just fascinating. I think that's going to be like the great test case for that, on how we go now, on how we cover and how Democrats run statewide races in what is a changing state.
Yeah, that could show a huge shift because, as the demographics are already shifting a lot, you just have a lot more Democrats in the southeastern part of the state than you used to. And it used to be a heavily southwestern party. And now it's not. And so with Arkush's exit, I mean, Kenyatta could really surprise a lot of people, but he does need to learn how to raise a little bit more money because Fetterman's got just so much cash, and Lamb has the ability to tap into a lot of cash as well. But he's already punched way above his weight, and again, it could just be one of those surprises. And I think the other thing I'm kind of excited about is Pittsburgh congressional delegation is going to be totally different. You have Doyle retiring, you have Summer Lee running, you have Jerry Dickinson running, you have Steve Irwin running already, but then you also have candidates that are going to be running for that suburban Pittsburgh seat, whatever the lines are going to be, like Connor Lamb's old seat, current seat. And we might be in for a surprise there too. And we might just have a totally different makeup than what we're used to. Whereas Connor is kind of that, Western Pennsylvania, he's a Marine. He shoots a gun. He's a little bit more moderate on those kind of issues, but we could see a totally different makeup, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, the one place where I kind of find a little bit of difference is on the fundraising, the importance of raising money, or quote unquote learning to raise money. I think there's going to be so much money in this race, most of it spent on the Republican side, that kind of finding your way among advertising on television isn't going to be the way to distinguish yourself. And, Fetterman, who's run on multiple times, he has some work to do, right? So I think he's going to need every dollar that he has to kind of break in. I think the one point that was really keen is the importance of the Southeast, particularly Philadelphia. Philadelphia will be about 40% of the primary electorate in the Democratic primary. So as much as we talk about the whole state, as we talk about what's going on here and there, it's like recognizing that Malcolm Kenyatta is a state representative in North Philadelphia, has an incredible reputation there, has a legacy there. His grandfather was an activist of the highest order in Philadelphia. So there's a lot of things that money can't buy that Malcolm has. And there's a lot of things that money can't buy that John Fetterman doesn't have, and that Connor Lamb, quite frankly, doesn't have, right? Mm-hmm. And I think it's also important to recognize, as we're kind of rounding out what these personalities look like, that Congressman Lamb and Representative Kenyatta are essentially the same age. So when we talk about this new upswing of young talent kind of coming into Pennsylvania and having opportunities to lead, this is the epicenter of that. You have respectively, I think, a 34-year-old running against a 36-year-old to be a United States Senator, and that's pretty special, and that's something that's, again, unique to Pennsylvania in this election cycle.
Millennials. Right.
Shut up. I'm storming off the set now. Taking off the
we got Ossoff, we got Ossoff. Now we're going to.
Well, you can storm off because we are at the end of our show. It's been a lovely hour with you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about this local election cycle. We hope to have you back again when we talk about the general.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And
good to be
thanks
here.
again to our interpreters.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thanks for
Yes.
I really appreciate it.
I've never had an interpreter.
Me
It makes
either.
me feel
Yeah,
weird.
first time.
I'm a superstar now. This is like, Dr. Oz level,
Reach for the stars, David.
All right. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And that was Ron Dito, David Dix, and Chris Potter joining us, talking about a lot of different issues politically here in Pennsylvania, but most importantly, talking about this 19th and 24th legislative districts. Those elections will be held on April 5th. And just one thing I wanted to add before I pass it over to you to close this out is for those who missed it last night, I was joined by Latasha Mays, a candidate for the 24th on last night's Sunday night sit down. So stay tuned. We'll be making an announcement about who will be joining us this Sunday, but it won't run at 7 p.m. This Sunday, because that would be like sometime in the first quarter of the Super Bowl. So I think we're going to move up. It will be the Sunday afternoon sit down, the Super Bowl Sunday sit down afternoon, something. We'll come up with something, but it's not going to be the Sunday night sit down on Super Bowl Sunday. But really great conversation. Again, want to thank David, Ryan, and Chris. But back to you, Miracle, to close us out on another great Power Hour.
Yes, I hope everyone got a lot of great information about the upcoming local elections. This is just a reminder to make sure you're registered to vote. If you've changed your address, you changed your last name, you may have not voted in a few years, just make sure you go online to vote.pa.gov and double check your voter registration and update your voter registration. David did mention this in his conversation about us being a part of the transition team. Kahari, Jasiri, and I sit on various committees with the mayoral transition team, and they are asking for community input and feedback about recommendations that you would like to see this mayoral team implement. So if you look in the chat, if you go to GainyTransition.com, please go and click on the community survey and take that survey. You, one, must hit submit at the very end of the survey for it to be counted. And two, understand that this is an anonymous submission, but because this is tech involved, your IP address will be temporarily stored. So please do not put any threats into the community survey. Please do not be violent within the community survey, because we don't want anyone to get in trouble. But if you have ideas about what you would like this mayoral staff to look like, this mayoral team to implement, please make sure you take the community survey. And also, we know that a few weeks ago, Peter Spencer was murdered in a little hour outside of the city of Pittsburgh, and his family and friends have been really advocating for a fair and just investigation. And so there is a petition that we have in the chat that we are going to ask people to sign on to. Just making sure that people understand that those of us who knew Peter or who were friends and loved ones of Peter's friends and loved ones are not going to stop calling for justice. So please make sure you sign the petition. Next to last thing, make sure you like and subscribe on our YouTube channel. We have a lot of great content coming for you in the coming weeks, and we do want to make sure that we have the latest and best information for you. So make sure you subscribe. Make sure you donate to One Hood Power if you like the programming that you see. Or, like I said, trying to bring you so much more in 2022. And with that, I hope you have a great evening. This week, we do have a full house for you tomorrow for Tuesday at What Black Pittsburgh Needs to Know. Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we're talking with mental health providers. For Wednesday, we have This Week in White Supremacy. And again, Ask a Black Doctor is going to be in person, so it will not be screened. So with that, please make sure you're staying warm, you're staying safe, and have a great evening.
Good night.